Thank you very much. Thank you in advance for listening. It's a huge privilege to be here. I have not been to Berlin before, and it's wonderful to be here. It is living up to everything that I have been told. And also, thank you very much for allowing me to speak English. I'm afraid that if I spoke in German, this would be a very, very short speech. So thank you, Marco, also for bringing up the equity research, which I remember from many years ago, trying to forget, but I still remember it's hard to forget. But learn some lessons that have been useful since. So as Marco mentioned, I run a site called Business Insider, which you can think of as the Wall Street Journal for the digital generation. Hopefully some of you have read it. If so, thank you very much. Hopefully some more of you will read it over time. I will tell you a little bit about our story because we're operating in the digital media sector, which is a sector that has had a lot of controversy about it over the last 10 years. Everyone has been very worried about the future of news. Will there be journalism? Will all newspapers die? And will the world be a horrible place? The answer is no, there is going to be a journalism. It's going to be great, and the world is doing just fine. So I'll talk a little bit about digital journalism and Business Insider, talk about the state of the digital media market, and then talk about where we're going as well. So Business Insider, we started about 8 years ago. In those days, if you wanted to make an investment pitch that had investors such in a hurry to run away and say no, all you had to do was say, content. Because in those days, everyone said, oh, content's a terrible business. You've got to be a platform. So we went around and we said, we have this idea for a technology journalism site. And people would say, that's very nice, thank you. Next pitch, please. But we were able to scrape together a little bit of money. And we started, and we were 3 of us writing in the loading dock of another startup. We basically had to move aside when the food delivery would come for the other startup. And they would put the soda here. But we were writing very frantically. The first day, 1,000 readers came. We thought, wow, that's a great start. But unfortunately, over the next week, the readership declined, and we got down to about 500. And we said, well, this isn't going so well. But we kept at it. Ultimately, the readership began to climb. And then now, over the last 8 years, we've grown steadily. Now we're the most read business publication in the world, which is great. If you'd told me that a few years ago, I would have said, oh, that's you talking back in the 1990s when everyone was crazy. It'll never happen. But it has happened, and it's wonderful. I'm very proud of our team. But to talk about what we were thinking, we started with a simple theory, which is that digital is a new medium. If you look back over the history of other media, to television, for example, what you find is that when a new medium comes along, the old journalists say, hey, it's a great new medium. It's going to be even better for exactly what we do now. And the first television journalists basically got up in front of a microphone and read a newspaper. Totally boring. But then pretty quickly, people figured out, hey, you can do things with TV that you can't do with print. It's different. Maybe it's not better, although in some ways it is better, but it's definitely different, so let's see what TV can be. And ultimately, our idea was it's a new medium, a new form of journalism and model is going to evolve. Newspapers look very much different from television, so we figured ultimately this would look a lot different. When you look at it, it doesn't look that different, but underneath the surface, it's actually incredibly different. So we focused 100% on digital. We didn't worry about print or television. We didn't try to copy print or TV, and in the early days, we got a lot of criticism for that, along with other sites like Huffington Post. Ariana Huffington spoke this morning. Lots of criticism. Oh, aggregation, this is terrible. Oh, it's just clicks, clickbait. All these different things were thrown at us, but again, we were trying to experiment and figure out what is it that works in this medium? What do readers want? And ultimately, happily, that strategy worked. We began to figure out the medium, we began to figure out the kind of stories people wanted, and ultimately we began to grow readership. And so very strong organic readership growth over the last 8 years, up to 70 million uniques per month now. Strong growth across all platforms, both mobile and desktop. We're about evenly split now. Strong video growth. This is something that for a while, we weren't sure this would work. Jeff Bezos is one of our investors, and one of the great things, if Jeff Bezos ever calls you and says, hi, I'd like to invest in your company, my advice, say yes immediately. Because in addition to being an incredible entrepreneur, Jeff Bezos is also just incredibly inspiring and helpful. And pretty much everything he says. He doesn't say a lot because he doesn't have a lot of time because he's running this big business and making rockets and stuff. But what he says is incredibly valuable. And one of the things he said early on was, you know, when you try a new thing, it's going to feel like it's failing for a long time. You've got to experiment and figure things out. So video is a classic example of something that felt like it was failing for a long time. Why? Well, because our original idea in video was, hey, we can just put a desk here and a camera here, and every morning when the market opens, we can have a guest come in, and we can ask the guest, what do you think? Is the market going to go up, or is the market going to go down? It'll be amazing. We can open it up, and the whole world can watch. So the first morning we did that, and 7 people watched, and 5 of them actually worked in the newsroom. So we said, well, that's not such a great start. And we tried to get a little better at that, a little better at that. Ultimately, we realized 2 things. One, people don't want to watch people talking about the market online. There are television stations like CNBC that are great at that. We will never be as good at that. So the best we will ever be if we do that is bad CNBC. Also, there are television stations available online for free for anybody who wants to watch them, and nobody watches them. So maybe that's not what people want in digital. So that started the experimentation process. We experimented a lot, lots of bad ideas. Some things worked, some things didn't. But eventually we started to figure it out. And recently our video growth has been great, in part thanks to Facebook, which is an amazing platform for video. We're up to about 60 million streams a month. Subscriptions. Remember 4 or 5 years ago when people were just getting used to the idea that advertising, okay, maybe advertising will work, but no one will ever pay for content online. Everything has to be free. Once again, not correct, fortunately. Subscription business is growing nicely. Bill talked earlier about their great subscription business. People will happily pay for things that they love or things, in our case, that help them do their jobs better. And so the subscription business has become good for us as well. As I said before, we're now the #1 business site in the United States, which is very nice. Been strong growth. Strong revenue growth, too. This isn't just willy-nilly growth of traffic. We're actually building a business behind it. And then another thing you hear all the time is that ad prices are going down. It's terrible. Everybody's going to die. The world's going to end. There's going to be no news. Actually, for some folks who are not trying to maintain incredibly high price points from the print world, advertising rates are going up, in part from programmatic, which is very powerful, part from native, part from video and mobile. These are areas that are now in hot demand, and so happily our prices per page are going up, which is good. And most happy of all, for those who are very worried about the future of journalism, is that our editorial budget has been increasing every year as a result and should be about $11 million this year. Now, for those of you keeping count, the New York Times or big newspapers like that, okay, they spend $100, $200 million a year. That's quite a bit more than we're spending. Our hope is that over time, ultimately, we can spend that much as well. But the spending is going in the right direction. Digital journalism works, and some of the companies will continue to grow, we hope, for decades. We hope to be one of those. So what's the key to our success if we boiled it down? It is focusing 100% on digital and not trying to reinvent print or reinvent television. Print and television are great. They're very different from each other. They're wonderful media that have this incredible power to transform the world, but they are very different than digital. And we, fortunately, did not try to recreate them. And having done this for a while, I would say, actually, that digital is as different from print and television as print and television are from each other. So if you are looking at a newspaper that happens to be struggling on the web with digital, instead of saying, oh, there must be a bunch of idiots in that building, they can't even figure out how to do a website, think about it this way. If the newspaper had to launch a full 24-hour cable news network, how easy would that be for them? Answer, it would be incredibly difficult, because it's incredibly difficult to publish a world-class newspaper every day. It's incredibly difficult to do a great 24-hour news network, and it's incredibly difficult to do a global 24-hour digital news website. So they're all very hard. And how are they different? That's the next question. I'm not going to go into detail here, but there are 3 main differences. First is editorial, second is distribution, and the third is economics. On the editorial side, there are many native digital story formats that just don't exist in other media, and they're very, very powerful. Articles exist, long video exists, but there are also some new ones. Just as an example, for example, in this age of visual photography, you may have heard about the tar sands in Canada. This is where a lot of oil is buried in sand. It's very expensive. It's far up in Canada somewhere. Some people think, this is going to destroy the world. We'll burn the oil and the globe will heat up and we'll all die. Other people think, no, we will get the oil and we will no longer be dependent on the Middle East. We must go to the tar sands and get the oil. But nobody actually knows what it's like up there. So if you work at a newspaper or a TV company, what you would do is you would send somebody up to write an article. They would come back with a very long article. If you were good at painting the pictures in your mind, you would get a sense of it. Or maybe you'd go do a documentary on what it looked like, but it would cost a lot of money. You'd have to be watching TV at the right time. What we did was we sent a photographer up who also happens to be a great reporter. He rented a plane. He flew over the tar sands, the whole mining operation, came back with hundreds of photos, and put together what is a great story format for us, which we call the photo essay, which is about 70 pictures with a voiceover. People love to read those online. It's very visual. It's a totally new story type. You couldn't do it in a magazine because it would be prohibitively expensive, but pictures really are worth 1,000 words, and it was great to see. So there's that. There's digital news production. Proprietary technology also is different. Distribution is very different with all the different social networks and platforms, and economics are very different. Often in the United States, at least, you hear newspapers saying, this is just so terrible. Digital dimes. We cannot support our print paper with what we're making from our digital advertisements. That is true. You cannot support a print newspaper. The good news is you don't necessarily have to, because you can be digital, and digital supports digital, which is really all it needs to support. So it won't save newspapers, but if you can build a great website, ultimately that will work. And to give you just a glimpse of this, one of the reasons we have survived this long is that our newsroom is much more productive than a lot of traditional newsrooms. Our journalists on the right there generate twice as many readers per month as our closest competitor, which has a traditional newsroom. So this enables us to run at a cost that is a much more difficult cost for a lot of our competitors. So let me talk about the market for a couple minutes. Attention in digital is moving to digital, away from analog media, especially to mobile. We all know this. Spending is also following. In the United States now, almost half of the spending is already digital, which is pretty incredible at the top companies, which is pretty incredible if you consider we're only really 20 years into this move. Mobile, when mobile came along, it took a medium that was really 9 to 5 at work and extended it the full day and weekends. So it's brought a lot of opportunity for digital media companies. It's multi-screen. You can't just concentrate on one or the other. For a year or two, people thought, hey, there might be a CNN of mobile. No, there's a CNN, and it is on mobile and TV and ultimately on the web. There's no need to have a specialized CNN. Each device has a different prime time. What we've learned, tablets tend to be used while you're watching TV at home, smartphones all day, computers during work. You have to think about this as you want to reach people. All of this transition has put a lot of pressure on newspapers. Their advertising, at least in the United States, is still collapsing. Now, TV viewership is starting to change, and this ultimately will have even farther reaching effects than newspapers as well. So Google, I know you talk a lot about the power of Google here. We are aware of the power of Google in the United States as well. Google in the United States is bigger than all US newspapers and all US magazines. Remember when people sort of dismissed Google as a search engine? Not anymore. In the United States, when I was growing up in the 1990s, everyone used to talk about big media, these huge companies that controlled everything. They're so powerful. No one can think for themselves anymore. How can we have this so much power? Now Google is twice as big in terms of revenue as the biggest big media company, which would be Time Warner. Facebook now reaches more young people than free television. Extraordinary change. For a long time, TV was just hanging in there as the biggest medium. Not anymore. Again, this is the United States. Netflix recently passed HBO in terms of number of subscribers and is on its way in terms of revenue as well. One of the knocks against digital for a long time was, well, yeah, sure, a lot of people watch digital, but you can't make any money in digital. That is starting to change, especially in video. Netflix and iTunes are now considerably larger than an average cable network in the United States. So they're becoming big businesses in addition to everything else. Even YouTube, the middle line here, which is just advertising supported, is almost now closing in on CBS, which is one of our biggest broadcast networks. So getting bigger all the time, these are becoming very large businesses. And even digital news and media, this sector that everybody is so worried about, is actually starting to hit its stride. The top 6 or 7 companies, of which we're fortunate to be one, Vice, BuzzFeed, others that you've heard of, should do about $1 billion of revenue this year. So that's starting to be a number that even a big media person would say, that's okay. It's not so small anymore. And we're still at the beginning, hopefully many, many years to grow. So where are we going in the future? Here is the single biggest and most important trend in media right now, the generational shift. When you look at an average of media consumption across all of us, it doesn't look that startling. The low bar here is the average. What you see is, okay, people still watch a lot of TV in the green. Yeah, they listen to some radio, they read some print. Sure, they use a smartphone and a computer, but it's kind of evenly spread across all of them. That is very misleading because that average is skewed by people who are old, like me, and people who are older than I am, who pretty much do nothing but watch TV and will until they die. And they even read newspapers and will until they die. Young people don't anymore. So really, if you want to see where we're going, what you should do is look at what 16 to 24-year-olds are doing. That's the bar on the right. 70% of their consumption is basically on a smartphone or a computer. So that is where we are going. In 10 years, that is going to be the heart of the mass market. The whole world will have changed as a result of that. Ad spending always follows attention. There is a lot of ad spending left to move. There is still a lot of spending in print, even though only a tiny percentage of our attention is focused on it. And there is a colossal amount of money spent on television. Television viewing is starting to change. Ultimately, that money will move. Here, just to put it out there, is TV. People are not watching as much as TV as they used to, but you wouldn't know it looking at the spending. Digital is that tiny little blue strip at the bottom. Over the next few years, that should change. In fact, I bet that ultimately TV spending, advertising on networks, just on networks, not on TV consumption, ultimately will look like what newspapers did, where they keep climbing, eventually fall off, and we have huge disruption within the TV industry. In digital media, 3 good, strong revenue streams. Advertising, subscriptions and licensing, and commerce is starting to become bigger. Digital is really brand display advertising. It's being driven by 4 streams right now: programmatic, mobile, video, and native spending. And a few points about this business, just to leave you with a couple things. First, it's only now, after 10 to 15 years, that we're starting to see as much capital invested in digital media as we did in cable TV and print. For a long time, when we started, as I said, you couldn't raise any money because people thought content was a terrible business. Now, investors are actually investing hundreds of millions of dollars in some of these companies, and that is going to allow them to get scale that ultimately would have been inconceivable. Vice has raised a huge amount of money, but that's just starting to compare to some of the cable networks like MSNBC, which started with $225 million of financing. Digital media companies can get vastly larger than most people think right now. Everyone keeps talking about how much bigger could BuzzFeed get? BuzzFeed could probably get 10 times the size it is right now. There's really no barrier to how much editorial they can add and where they can go. And digital media, importantly, is not winner take all. The technology business, as we all know, is winner take all. 10 companies want to be Twitter, 1 becomes Twitter, everybody else is dead. In media, thankfully, you can have more winners than that. So there should be several of them. But there will not be enough to make everybody a winner, which is, I think, the corollary of that. This is a hard business, and ultimately it's going to be tough for a lot. So in summary, I would say this is a golden age for media. The world has never been better informed, despite the pressure on the print model in a lot of cases. 2 billion of us now have news gathering capabilities in our smartphone. TV and radio, for the most part, are doing okay. Some print is doing okay. Digital is thriving and getting better every day. And really, if you think about it, I would say that digital news and media is now basically equivalent to cable news in the late 1980s. We see what we've done over the last 30 years in cable news. Ultimately, we hope to see the same thing in digital. So thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here. Enjoy the rest of the conference.